If you're moving to Toronto and safety is high on your list, likely is, you've probably Googled something like safest neighborhoods in Toronto. And what you usually get back is opinions or reputation, Reddit threads with people's personal take, people saying, oh, I used to live there and it's not that bad. Instead of all of that, I've pulled 5 years of violent and property crime data and looked at neighborhoods that consistently show up well below the Toronto average. Not just one good year, not just it feels quiet, but actual patterns. And today I'll walk you through those 5 areas that stand out and, more importantly, why they stand out. Okay, so very quickly, here's what we're looking at. Violent crime can be kind of broken down into some subcategories. So you've got assault, robbery, homicide, and shootings. And then property crime would include auto theft, breaking and entering, theft from vehicles, bike theft, and theft over a certain amount. Everything is measured per 100,000 residents and compared against the Toronto average from 2021 to 2025. So we're not fooled by population size, we're just looking at rates. Oh, and by the way, there are 158 neighborhoods that the City of Toronto and Toronto Police Services has kind of broken the whole city down into. So we're going to look at 5 of those today. Okay, so for the first one we're going to look at, and these are in no particular order, but the first one we're going to look at is Leaside, Bennington. These are how either the City of Toronto or Toronto Police Services describes them. People almost never kind of join Leaside and Bennington into one. It's just Leaside, or Bennington Heights is kind of how people who live in the area would refer to them. But as far as City of Toronto, Toronto Police Services, Leaside Bennington is the official name of the neighborhood. Here is Leaside Bennington. You can kind of see the outline there. Here is Bayview Avenue. This is Eglinton, so it kind of stretches just a little bit north of Eglinton. It kind of borders right up along Thorncliffe Park. So for those of you who might know, like Costco is kind of over in this area over here. And then the Bennington part is the kind of the bottom part. So down by Evergreen Brickworks and along the like Don Valley and that kind of stuff. But it's this bottom portion here that is like the Bennington Heights area. Combined, those are beside Bennington Heights. So let's take a look at the numbers. Across the top, we've got assaults, like I mentioned, all the kind of subcategories that are there. And here are the total raw numbers for Leaside. So 187 assaults, 20 robberies, no homicides, 3 shootings. Now, please bear in mind that these numbers along the bottom are obviously massive, but they're for the entire city. So just kind of bear with me while I just kind of go through some stuff here. But, you know, it looks staggering that Leaside, you know, only had 20 robberies and the City of Toronto had 13,000, nearly 14,000. But, you know, we're talking about a very small portion of the city compared to the entire city. Over here, VMCI. So that stands for Violent Major Crimes Indicator. And these would be the totals for that 4-year period, so 2021 to 2025. Add up all these numbers, so 187 plus 20 plus 0 plus 3, that's where the 210 comes from, and that's where you're getting that 130,000 number for Toronto citywide. Now, if we look at the property crimes, here they are here, auto theft, breaking and entering, etc., and you can see the total numbers here, Leaside kind of compared to Toronto as a whole, and then over at the end, same thing as before, but this one is the Property Major Crimes Indicator, PMCI, and here are the totals for that 5-year span. 915. Now, one thing I wanted to point out, by far and away, you can see that in Leaside, auto theft, by far and away, is the highest kind of crime occurrence that happens in Leaside. Second is theft from motor vehicle. So pretty related in terms of the like types of crimes that are happening. Now, when we look at rates and averages, here's why Leaside kind of stands out as one of the safest neighborhoods in the city. So what we do is we take the violent major crime indicator and figure out a rate per 100,000. So you get 231.5. Now notice that that is higher than the total that I had 2 charts ago. I think it was 210. It just means that Leaside Bennington's population is less than 100,000. So when you turn it into a rate per 100,000, the number actually goes up a little bit. Then your property rate per 100,000 is just a little over 1,000. And so when you compare it with the Toronto average, here is the Toronto average for violent major crime indicator. It's 841.4. So when you're comparing this 231.5 to that number there, it's 73% or 72.5% below the city's average. So that's a big reason why Leaside is considered one of the safest neighborhoods, is because, you know, those crimes that make people feel unsafe would be things that are like kind of personal affronts or personal attacks. So obviously homicide and things like robberies, assaults, those kinds of things. And Leaside has a significantly below kind of Toronto average rate for those types of incidences. Now, interestingly enough, the property major crimes indicator is about 11%, 10.9, above the city's average. So that's comparing this 1,007.9 to this number here, 908.8. And it's above, and it's because you've got more on average crimes related to vehicles. Now, why would that be? Leaside and Bennington are relatively affluent areas. I have to imagine that the types of cars that are in those areas are desirable by criminals. And also, Leaside and Bennington don't have a ton of garages. It's a fairly older established neighborhood. So a lot of driveway parking, a lot of front pad parking, that kind of stuff. So you have exposed vehicles. Theft just kind of happens maybe a little bit more easily because they're not kind of locked away or tucked away inside of a garage. The other thing is, if you think back of the map, Leaside and Bennington are close to major arteries, roads. So you've got Bayview, you've got Eglinton, so you've got, for lack of a better word, like escape routes. And they're also not terribly far from the Don Valley Parkway as well. So kind of getting out of those areas is somewhat easier for people who are stealing cars. The other thing that I would add is that Leaside is overwhelmingly residential. It's not a nightlife hub. It's not packed with condo towers, although they are kind of popping up with a little bit more frequency and people are not happy about it. But it doesn't draw heavy late night foot traffic. It's a place that people go home to. And when you remove that late night activity and the clusters of bars and dense entertainment strips and all that kind of stuff, violent incidents tend to drop. It's not opinion. That's just how cities work and behave. So Leaside's profile looks like this. Very, very low violent crime, but moderate to slightly elevated vehicle exposure risk. And that means Leaside is safe, but it's a very specific type of safe. And you want to just make sure that you have really good anti-theft components for your vehicles, I think, if you're living in those areas. So the next area we're going to talk about is Steeles. So it is in the kind of northeast-ish part of the city. You've got Steeles right here. This is Kennedy. This is Victoria Park Avenue. And this is it's McNichol Avenue, which is like the next major block north of Finch. So it's this kind of like rectangular pocket. And let's take a look at what the crime numbers look like for that area. Okay, so here are the numbers for Steeles. And you can see that they're similar to Leaside's. In that assault kind of leads the way, that there are no homicides, very low shootings, and a relatively low total of violent major crime indicators. And when we take a look at the property crime indicators, you can see that, again, relatively low totals. Bike theft, I apologize, there were 11 bikes stolen. So here's your total, 543 for that area compared to the Toronto citywide, again, that 140,000 number. And when we take a look at the rates, and they get adjusted to the per 100,000, you can see that the violent major crime indicator is 236, that the property is 434. And so what that translates, you'll notice that these numbers remain the same, right? These are the averages for the city of Toronto, but that the violent major crime indicator is about 72% below the city average. That's comparing this number to this number. And then the property major crime indicator is 52% below. That's comparing the 434 to the 908.8. So both categories, unlike Leaside, where one was significantly lower, the violent, but property was actually slightly above, Steeles is an area where both types of crimes were significantly below the city averages. Okay, so violent crime, very low in Steeles, property crime below, but why is it significantly lower than Leaside? Just an example. It could be vehicle mix. So statistically, the average household income in Steeles is lower than in Leaside, which usually means fewer high-end like luxury vehicles, which means fewer targets, that kind of stuff. The other thing is the neighborhood is, for lack of a better word, newer. So you have homes that have a lot of attached garages and built-in garages, so cars aren't sitting exposed in driveways. Third, and I'm not a crime expert or anything like that, but I couldn't help but looking at the map and notice that there was a very interesting street layout. So I want to show you what that looks like. When I zoom in and take a look at Steeles, take a look at what you notice. There are a ton of ports and crescents and various roundabouts. Like, you've got a couple of major roads, right? There's Warden, Birchmount, and then the ones on the exterior. But like literally every other road where the vast majority of the population lives is on some kind of crescent or court. So that has to reduce thoroughfare traffic. It's probably harder to get in and out quickly. I have to imagine that auto theft like thrives on being able to kind of get in and out fairly quickly, and all the cul-de-sacs and crescents and courts and stuff like that really slows that down. So summarize, Steeles is low violent crime, low property crime, less target rich. So it's a different structure than Leaside, but again, one of the safest neighborhoods in the city. Okay, so the next area that we're going to talk about is called West Rouge. This is on the east side of the city. Even though it's called West Rouge, it's in Scarborough, which is kind of getting closer towards, you know, the transition to like Pickering and Ajax and all that kind of stuff. Here's the 401, so just kind of give you an idea. Kind of cuts down over to the lake, follows the Rouge River up to Shepherd Avenue. That's what forms West Rouge. And there's a bit of a different story here, so we'll take a look. So here are the violent crime indicators. As you can see, again, dominated by assault. That is a common theme that we're going to see throughout. Homicides are not zero like they were in Leaside and Steeles. We've got 2, and the number of shootings are much higher as well. The total kind of number over that 5-year span, 431 total incident rates. Now, if we look at the property crime, here are the numbers here. And again, auto theft, high, and theft from motor vehicle, relatively high. Here are your total numbers compared to that Toronto citywide number. And then if we flip over to the averages and the rates, which is kind of what we're interested in, here is the rate per 100,000 citizens, 384.3. If we compare that, the Toronto average, we're looking at 54.3% below. And then this rate for the property is 675.3, and it is almost 26% below. So this is kind of similar to Steeles, where you do have, and this is not similar to Steeles, similar to Steeles in the sense that both categories are below. They're not as far below as Steeles is. What's different about this one is that you did have a couple of incidences of homicides and a greater number of shootings by quite a bit. The averages per 100,000 still work out well below the city, but you will have incidences of certain types of events that happen in this neighborhood compared to the previous two, which is Leaside and Steeles. So what's going on with West Rouge? It's got much larger, kind of almost suburban-like lots. There's more driveway parking. It does have very close proximity to the 401, kind of runs through almost the middle of it. So highway access is great for commuting. It's also efficient for organized theft groups. So violent crime stays relatively low because it's largely residential, but property crime will be reflected in how easy it is to get in and out of the area. So again, structure of the neighborhood does matter and impacts those numbers. Next one on our list is Guildwood. This is another kind of area of Scarborough. It is on the east side of the city, but it's towards the south. So you can see that it's kind of bordered along by the lake. And then this is Scarborough Golf Club Road right along here. Here's Kingston Road right here. And then here's Morningside. So that kind of gives you a bit of an idea of, you know, what the general kind of area is. And so let's dive into the numbers. Common theme, assault is the highest numbers by far. But this one did see a couple of homicides, relatively low number of shootings though. And, you know, the totals for the violent major crime indicators, fairly low, like Leaside. Leaside was 210, this one was 240, 26 robberies. Now, when we take a look at the property crimes, you can see that things like auto theft, very low compared to some of the other neighborhoods that we've talked about so far. And then, so the theft from vehicle for the property crimes is kind of what dominates, but very low overall kind of property major crime indicators. Now, when we kind of break it down into the averages and the rates, you're looking at numbers that are about 72, 71.5%, and 39% below the city averages. So like Steeles, both categories significantly below the city averages indicates a very kind of safe, generally speaking, area. If you think about the map and you think about where Guildwood is, it feels very insulated, and that sort of shows up in the numbers. So it doesn't sit on any kind of major nightlife corridors. It doesn't host any kind of like heavy commercial strips. It's not necessarily a destination neighborhood, although it's not terribly far from the Bluffs, but it's not kind of right at the Bluffs where, you know, people might be going and visiting a lot. It's lower traffic. You notice that there weren't a lot of like major roads kind of passing through it or bordering it necessarily. So you've got lower kind of flow going in and out, fewer high activity nodes, I guess, if you will. And that usually means fewer opportunities for both violent and property crime. Okay, the last one we're going to take a look at is Centennial Scarborough, but it's actually also referred to as Port Union. This is in the east side of the city. It is also in Scarborough, obviously. And you can see right here that it's kind of bordered by Port Union and Highway 2, which is like kind of like an extension of Kingston Road, sort of. And then there's this kind of like green space that cuts down over to the lake and kind of terminates there at Port Union Park. So if we take a look at the numbers, again, you'll see same thing. Assault kind of dominates what's going on. There were no homicides over that period. Total number of 230, so like very low violent major crime indicators, like all of the neighborhoods. Obviously, this is a few about the safest neighborhoods, so clearly that would make sense. And then when we get to the property crime indicators, I get auto theft, still relatively low, and theft from vehicle is kind of the highest of that category. Here, your total's 435 over that span compared to the city. Let's take a look at the kind of normalized numbers, so the averages per 100,000 and the rates. And ultimately, we're looking at 66.3 and 33.7% below the Toronto averages for both violent and property major crime indicators. So no question that it is has a very kind of clean profile as a neighborhood. Very safe in kind of almost all aspects. One of the things that stands out is, again, it's a very established kind of older neighborhood. You have very high owner occupancy. This is sort of speculation on my part, but it's lots of detached homes. You've got very low kind of like renter turnover, low turnover in general. When people own and they tend to stay long term, you get to know your neighbors better. There's more consistency on the street. People notice when something is kind of like off or doesn't quite fit. Somebody's away, or there's a car that they haven't seen for a long time or never seen in that neighborhood, that kind of thing. And so that kind of environment often shows up in both low violent crime numbers and property crime numbers. It's not necessarily because of who lives there, but it's because of how stable the streets are. So here's what all 5 neighborhoods have in common. They're not nightlife districts. They're not stacked condo cores. They're not major entertainment hubs. They're primarily residential. They are places where people live, not places where people go out to, other than visitors and family and that kind of stuff. So when neighborhoods function that way, violent crime tends to stay lower. They are neighborhoods that people are going to feel very safe. Now, a couple of very important reality checks. Crime almost never spreads evenly across an entire neighborhood. In most cities, a small number of streets or intersections account for a large share of incidences. So even in a safe neighborhood, there might be like a busy plaza or one arterial kind of like intersection, one commercial strip that's going to show up more often in the data. So that's why when someone asks me, is this neighborhood safe? Usually how I would respond is like, kind of what street or what pocket are we talking about? Because averages are helpful, but streets are, what determine whether you're safe or not. Now, generally speaking, I would say all 5 of those neighborhoods, it almost doesn't matter what street you're on. But, there are going to be pros and cons, even outside of safety, that kind of determine what streets might be better than the other. Now, the other thing I wanted to point out, again, the per capita rates are based on residents. So downtown areas host a massive number of daily non-resident traffic, commuters, people who work there, people who are visiting to go to restaurants and that kind of stuff. That type of activity can inflate crime rates relative to the lived experience. So these 5 neighborhoods that we talked about in this video are primarily residential. Their per capita numbers very closely reflect daily life. So if you're relocating to Toronto and safety is a major priority, these 5 areas are very consistently and meaningfully below the city average for violent crime. That's not based on 1 year, that's based on 5 years of patterns. But numbers, they help narrow your field. They don't help make your decision. You still need to factor in things like budget and commute and schools and what kind of house or property that you want to live in and what kind of lifestyle do you want. Safety is very hyperlocal, and so are all those other factors as well. So if you're looking at one of these neighborhoods or somewhere else entirely and you want help thinking through how it compares, I'm happy to break it down with you, because the difference between it feels safe and it statistically is low risk is often the nuance. Drop the neighborhood you're curious about in the comments, or you can reach out directly if you want to have a proper conversation about it. In the next video, I'm going to break down the 5 neighborhoods that sit above the Toronto averages, and they might be considered maybe the least safe neighborhoods in Toronto, but there's quite a bit of nuance that I'm going to have to explain in that one that I'm sort of looking forward to, because it doesn't always mean what people think that it might. I'm Jamie Harnish. I'm with Bosley Real Estate. Thank you for watching. Appreciate it very much, and I hope to see you on the next one.